This is a repeat of a lecture I gave at the Fischbone Society in August of this year at the Grand Traverse Resort in Acme, Michigan. Unfortunately, the recording at that time, which I expected to be live, didn't turn out that way, so I'm repeating this lecture for this purpose. I started the lecture by saying, by way of introduction, I've got to tell you my favorite golf story. Jay Haas, a well-known player on the PGA Tour, Champions Tour, said, "Lanny, I have to have my picture taken with you." Normally, the person asks the pro to have the picture taken with him. The pro doesn't usually ask somebody else to have the picture taken with him. I said, "Well, what's this about, Jay?" And he said, "Well, I went to my doctor 3 weeks ago, and he's an orthopedic surgeon. I told him about my back problem, but I asked him, I said, 'Do you know Lanny Johnson? I had lunch with him 3 weeks before.' And my doctor said, 'Oh, no, you couldn't have had lunch with him. He's so old, he's probably dead. You probably had lunch with his son.'" Well, obviously that was pretty entertaining. So Jay said, "I want to send this picture of you and I and let my doctor know that you're still alive." So for this lecture that Dr. Fisher asked me to give on what's really important, deals with recognizing and honoring mentors. Actually, this meeting is about honoring the mentor of the audience here. Many of the people who have trained with Dr. Fisher, and he has been their mentor throughout the years. The theme of this particular lecture is, now you've heard the rest of the story. Many of you probably know about Paul Harvey, who got the Presidential Medal of Freedom honor many years ago, because he had a radio show at noon where he always told stories, and then he told you the rest of the story. And so the theme of what I'm going to present today is, I'm going to tell you a story, and then you're going to hear the rest of the story. Mentors are very important because they are a tangible reality. They're a helper, they're a teacher, they're a counselor, advisor. They give you direction and even correction. They can comfort you, and they can be your advocate. So the first mentors I had were really my parents. I had wonderful parents. They gave me advice, direction, correction. Then in high school, my swimming coach and golf coach was Everett McDougall. And I aspired to be a coach. And Everett said, no, you've got to be a surgeon. So this is a photograph of Everett McDougall and myself, 1951, after we had won the state high school championship in golf. Fred C. Reynolds was a professor of orthopedic surgery at Barnes Hospital, Washington University, a great mentor to me for advice, direction, and correction. And he really instilled with me honesty at any cost. And he really was able to say the proverb, "Swear to your own hurt." You have to have that kind of courage to be that honest. I really appreciated Dr. Reynolds. And then H. Relton McCarroll, great advice, direction, and correction. His presidential address in 1958 at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons was, "What good thing could come out of Nazareth?" And what he was pointing out was that you didn't have to be at a big university medical center or a big clinic in order to make a contribution to orthopedics. I took that at heart and actually practiced in a small town of East Lansing, Michigan. Lauren Ackerman was a pathologist, really helped my interest in pathology that's gone on for years. Joseph Boyes was a hand surgeon. I trained with him, had my fellowship with him, and he instilled with me that if you are not successful socioeconomically, you will not be successful medically. And he didn't mean charge a lot, he just meant be efficient in what you do. And I took that to heart, and his advice, direction, and correction was very helpful to me over the years. And now I want to tell you mentoring story number one. This is around 1980. A famous sports center named after the founder of that in the South had a famous sports surgeon who was very much against arthroscopy in those days. An unknown fellow at the famous sports hospital thinks otherwise, so that unknown fellow comes to Lansing, Michigan, and sits on a stepladder behind the country doctor and watches that country doctor do arthroscopic surgery. The unknown fellow launches out on his own, goes to a small hospital, perfects the technique, and he leaves the famous hospital and goes to town number 2, sets up a sports clinic. unknown doctor now becomes famous, and as famous, he goes to town number 3 and launches an institute under his name. And now the rest of the story. Dr. Houston, who founded the Houston Clinic, was against arthroscopic surgery. Jimmy Andrews, who you see on the right lower film here, was the young doctor who went to see the country doctor and learned how to do arthroscopy, and subsequently became very famous as the leading sports medicine doctor in the United States. Mentoring story number 2. Around 1982, a famous baseball player has a bad knee. Famous professor, who's the team doctor, says nothing can be done. Subsequently, the country doctor performs surgery and the player returns to sports. The famous baseball player, teammate of the first player, hurts his knee. Famous professor says nothing's wrong. Turns out that fans were even throwing car batteries out onto the lazy player in the outfield. Player goes to the country doctor, who removes a bucket-handled tear. This player becomes the first $1 million player in baseball. The famous professor, although embarrassed, invites the country doctor to do grand rounds at his university. And then the famous professor said, "This looks like it's important enough. I have a promising young surgeon here. Would you take him for 6 weeks and teach him in a fellowship how to do arthroscopic surgery?" The promising resident fulfills his promise, and here's the rest of the story. Player number 1 was Willie Stargell of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Player number 2 was Dave Parker, the first $1 million ball player in baseball. Dr. Ferguson, the famous orthopedic surgeon at the University of Pittsburgh, invites the young Freddie Fu to go to the country doctor and learn how to do arthroscopic surgery. And now you've heard the rest of the story. What we have to consider in medicine now, and also in this theme of this particular presentation, is evidence-based outcomes. And as I think about this, we have to subject this to 3 discernment categories. Is this scientific or non-scientific? Is this believable or unbelievable? And finally, is it true or false, with being true being the most important part of these categories. So the presentation you're about to hear, the rest of the story, you may see as unscientific, unbelievable, but I want to assure you, however, it is true. Now, my educational background, this is a real quick introduction. I went to Royal Oak High School in Michigan. I went to Michigan State University, and interestingly enough, I actually had 1 year in the veterinary school at Michigan State before I got a Bachelor of Science, and then went to Wayne State University Medical School. My limit of understanding at that time was twofold. You had to work hard with your mind in education. You had to work hard with your body, like in sports. But that was a limitation of my understanding. Now I have to give you a little religious bibliography. It's a quick introduction. I was raised in a Christian home. I was born again at age 12. I understood the idea of God and Jesus. I was a Bible believer, I guess, and I have tithes since age 12. But you should know I was a run-of-the-mill sinner. I tried to do the 10 Commandments, I failed. I tried to be a good Christian, I failed. So my concept of being a born-again Christian was you're going to live a very boring life, but you get to go to heaven. It seemed to be worth it, I guess. And God was a little bit more than a theory. He was not a tangible reality to me. So now here is the beginning of the rest of the story. I was in medical school, and I was listening to a lecture that was very boring. It was about Dempster's dumpsters, treating how to get rats eradicated in the city of Detroit. And during that particular lecture, I was kind of daydreaming, I guess. I wasn't paying a lot of attention because it didn't interest me. And suddenly I had an unexpected event that will take some time to describe it. It actually happened in a nanosecond, but I'm going to have to articulate a little longer than that to tell you what happened. It was like a message came from my belly or my abdomen, and in a nanosecond went to my brain. And what it said, and it scared me, said, I want to make a single important contribution to medicine. And it so scared me that I took like both hands in front of my face and pushed that down into my abdomen. And I said, I don't know what this is. It was a sudden, unreal experience. It was like lightning struck. And I never want to hear that again. Never want to hear it again. And I said, please, whoever this is, no more of these events. And I tried to forget about it. Why was it? Because, first of all, I didn't know what it was. And second of all, it said something that I didn't think was possible. How could I make a major contribution to medicine? It wasn't possible. And so I didn't want to ever hear it again. I didn't want to hear something that I didn't think I could do. So time marched on. I did actually forget about it. Had a residency program in orthopedics at Barnes Hospital, 1959 to 1964. I went in the Air Force from 1964 to 1966. In 1966, I had a hand surgery fellowship with Joseph Boys in LA Orthopedic Hospital. In 1967, I started private practice alone, solo, doesn't happen much anymore, in East Lansing, Michigan. But also in 1967, I decided to walk away from my mentor. Time raced on, but now for the rest of the story. From 1971 to 1973, I suffered with manic depression. And I have to tell you, it's very exciting, but there's no peace. And after 2 years of this racing, physically and mentally, I finally reasoned within myself, if this is so great, why do I feel so bad? So I further reasoned I need a new mentor, not the one that was driving manic depression. I'm going to go back to my previous mentor. So although I'd walked away from God, I ran back to my mentor of my teenage years. And I saw in reading publications that he had, I laid a hand on my own head and said, I am delivered from manic depression, and I never had it since that day. Now, return to my former mentor. I wanted 4 things to start over with. 1, I wanted to have an exciting life because it's very hard not to be manic because the excitement's there, but of course you have no peace. I'd like to know the will for my life. I want to be plain as black and white, and I needed the power to be able to do it. So here's how these requests went. The exciting life, I have to say that exciting as biology is in medical school, Zoe of eternal life and learning those principles is way more exciting. His will for my life I wasn't told right away, but plain as black and white were in his previous publications. And I had the power to do it, was given with the Spirit within. So who is this mentor? It's the God of the tangible reality. It's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the Jesus of Nazareth, and it's manifest today by the presence of the Holy Spirit. Don't leave just yet. You got to hear the rest of the story. No collections, no altar call, and no holy rolling. Now back to the rest of the story. Around 1976, I was a part of developing motorized instruments for arthroscopic surgery. And after we had developed that, we thought we would send it out to 12 famous arthroscopists to get their opinion. So what we did is we boxed it up when we said, well, here's an arthroscopic instrument. Tell us what you think, without prejudice, what it would be used for. And in 3 months, we're going to call for it back, and then you will tell us what it is, but we want you to return it at 3 months. So what happened? 3 months went by, didn't hear from any of them. What we found out is one did not want to pay $5 to get it out of the post office. Another one said it doesn't work in air. One other said it's good to remove only the fat pad. And the others, 12, no response, but they did return it. So the tangible reality is still missing in my life. I'm still seeking this aspect. So I asked my mentor for the tangible reality. It just can't be a theory anymore. And so here was the response. The original shaver, which you see on this photograph, was very slow turning, had a blunt end, was not aggressive. And therefore we needed something more aggressive. And so in September 1976, I'm working at my office late at night, maybe 10 or so, trying to draw pictures of how there'd be a more aggressive cutting end to the original shaver. And I got what I now understand to be a prophetic word. What happened was, I got a word similar to what happened when I was in medical school. I hadn't had that happen over those years. And there was like a message came to me saying, stop working on this, go home. This design belongs to you, and I will give it to you in a millisecond. Somehow that seemed to be truth to me, even though it was kind of speculative, but I bought into it and I said, okay. So I went home, I took the mentor's advice, I was excited, I stopped, I told my wife I'd been given the design, I called the company, told them I had the design, and I told close confidence what happened, and the design belonged to me because I felt that if I told them now, and then when it happened, there would be validation that I was told something ahead as a prophecy. And I didn't want to afterwards say, oh, by the way, did you know that my mentor told me this? So I wanted to have that done ahead of time. Well, of course, they also asked to see it, and I had to explain to it, I have it, but I don't have it, and when I get it, I'll get it in a millisecond. So my wife, family, and friends, they were all very polite. The company management, when I called them, said, everything else okay, Lanny? Nothing happened. October, November, December. And I now have to tell you what I've learned since about a prophetic word. There has to be evidence. I have to be certain that that's truth and that I'm not crazy. So there has to be criteria for validity. It has to be received, not generated, spoken in advance of the event, very specific, could not be contrived, share it with others in advance in order that you have validation, and it happens exactly as predicted or prophesied, but most importantly, it produces a tangible result, which in medicine today we've learned is an evidence-based outcome. Now, the rest of the story. In January of 1967, I flew out to Salt Lake City and visited and watched Bob Metcalf do surgery. And I'm flying back in an airplane somewhere maybe over Iowa, I have no idea. And in a millisecond, I grabbed a pad of paper and drew this out as quick as you see right there. I called it the keyhole cutter. And so I had the fulfillment of the prophecy. I was get the design belonged to me. I was told that last September. And I was told I'd get it in a millisecond. And without being contrived or even thinking about it, riding on the airplane, that came to me, and I drew it that quick. Now here's the genius behind this, and this is not me. Normally scissors cut in a direction that push the tissue away. And what was so clever about this, first of all, there's suction that draws the fragments into the tube and out of the joint. But notice that the cutting action, whether it is forward or reverse, is cutting retrograde. So it is cooperating with the suction taking it out, but also the action of the scissors is in the direction to also take the tissue out. So I sent the design to the Dionix company, and in return, I got everybody else's idea. January, I got a design, different, didn't work. February, got a design, didn't work. March, I got a different design, didn't work. April, got a design, didn't work. One after the other, they didn't work. So finally in May, I said to the company, I said, would you guys humor me? And would you mind just making the design the way I sent to you? The one my mentor gave to me? Okay. So finally, I got the design in May, I think May 16th or 17th, and the day that it worked in surgery, I had my evidence-based outcome, which was a tangible reality to what I was looking for. But that day, I also had 2 visitors watching me do surgery. So now we have another kind of a tangible reality. The mentor knows the question and prescribes the answer. So here is the answer to the first question you will be asked by your visiting doctors. Now that didn't trouble me because I'd had that circumstance happen before where I had been told ahead what the answer was to a first question I was going to be asked, like on a TV or a radio interview. It made me start to wonder in retrospect, did my mentor invent the game show known as Jeopardy? I don't know. And anyway, so I'm home that night, and the answer to the first question is that they're going to ask you, you saw surgery performed by the power of the Holy Ghost. I went, oh, this is crazy. You got to be kidding. There's a mix-up here. This can't be my mentor. I don't know these guys. I can't possibly say that to these people. Okay. So the next day I go to surgery, and the 2 doctors didn't show up. I went, oh, wow, great. I'm off the hook. No problem. Well, they did show up, and at the end of the first case, the nurse came and said, "Oh, the doctor's in the locker room. They want to talk to you." I went, "Oh, no. Okay." So I went to the locker room, and they said, "Yesterday was such an exhausting day, but we did learn a lot. We're really excited, but we're probably going to go home early, but we want to thank you. But we have to tell you, we saw something yesterday in surgery, and we're wondering what we saw. Would you tell us what we saw?" Now, after a long pause, I said to myself, this is a real-life Jeopardy game, the game on. So I said, "You saw surgery performed by the power of the Holy Ghost." These two guys just backed up, took a pause for a minute, and after they recovered, they said, "We thought it was something like that." Well, I think that shocked me as much as I shocked them with what I told them. And so that we had a nice conversation. Everything was okay after that, and they left to go home. And so I'm wondering, what's the outcome going to be of me doing what I thought was absolutely the most foolish thing I could do? Well, I have to tell you, you might wonder, why could I be so foolish to say something, "You saw surgery performed by the power of the Holy Ghost"? Here's the answer. I had made such a fool of myself for the devil, I could not embarrass myself for Christ. So now what's the outcome? Doctor number one, he's a minister's son, I believe a Methodist minister's son. He writes me a letter in 3 weeks and said that he had no interest in God, but this experience had caused him to go back and seek to be lined up and walk a Christian life. Doctor number two, I saw him at a number of meetings over the period of a couple of years, and my mentor told me, never speak to him again about this. I went, after what I did, I can't talk to him again? No. 2 years later, he responded to me and told me that he had become a Christian. I'm seeing a tangible outcome to something that I thought was kind of foolish. Now the rest of the story. The granting of a U.S. patent is the evidence outcome. In my era was old school. The doctor was to get nothing for anything he invented. He only would earn money off of what his practice. So from 1972 to 1978, I worked with the Dionics Company. I paid all my own expenses. Any place I went to talk or travel, I spent the money. But one Saturday, I got a FedEx from them, and it said, "Please sign over your rights to this patent." Well, I didn't even know they applied for a patent. Well, you can see on the illustration there was a patent applied for. So I went, okay, I think they changed my philosophy about not taking anything. I think they changed my relationship with them. So I contacted Bill Harris at the Massachusetts General Hospital, who I'd known for other reasons, and he said, "I think you should get some royalty for what you did, since it was clearly your idea." So after some argument, they finally decided that he would put my name on it. Now, why is that? The federal government requires that everybody who contributes to a patent's name on it, and if that person is not going to get a benefit, then they have to assign their rights to the other people. So the Dionics Company applied for this patent without my name on it, and the patent office said, "We can't believe you did this in the absence of a surgeon. So there must have been a surgeon name. We can't grant this patent. You have to tell us who the surgeon was." They did tell him who the surgeon was, and the patent was granted with my name on it, and I subsequently received a royalty. Now, was prophetic word confirmed? Did motorized instrumentation meet the criteria? I believe it did. The validity was conserved. It was received ahead of time, not generated, spoken in advance, very specific, couldn't be contrived, and it happened exactly as predicted or prophesied. But importantly, it produced a tangible result, an evidence-based outcome, and the design secured a United States patent. Now, more of the rest of the story. Arthroscopy was not without opposition, from the Lansing orthopedic surgeons to the Michigan Orthopedic Society and the experts of the day. The Lansing orthopedic surgeons were kind enough and come and tell me that I was performing an unethical and immoral operation. If so, it's the most common unethical and immoral operation performed today. Ironically, those most against arthroscopy in the early days were the sports medicine doctors of that day, which I've shown a number of them here. And in fact, the orthopedic surgeons for the shoulder called it the tool of the devil. And their arguments were, why wouldn't you just open a door, like you see the picture on the left, rather than looking through a keyhole, which you can't see much. Well, of course, you can see more with an arthroscope than you can with opening the door. And the rejection that I got from the Michigan Orthopedic Society for 11 years, I got 8-balled. And then 4 years ago, they gave me the Lifetime Achievement Award, ironically, and asked me not to say anything about the fact that previous people had kept me out. The American Orthopedic Society of Sports Medicine President Les Bodner and Royer Collins, the secretary, came to visit me and watched me do arthroscopic surgery. And at the end of that, they asked me, did I want to be a member of sports medicine? I told them I'm just a local medical doctor, orthopedic surgeon. If they wanted to, fine. So the president of the society put me up. It was seconded by the secretary of the society, and I was blackballed. 2 years later, they asked me to do their national meeting and teach them about arthroscopy, and subsequently made me a member. Now, more rejection. Everyone here in the audience is into sports medicine, and sooner or later, you're going to experience rejection as a sports medicine doctor one way or another. And that happened to me. I was the orthopedic consultant for Michigan State for 10 years when I was practicing. And at that time, after 10 years, I was going around the country, traveling and lecturing regularly at many medical centers. And at one of them, UCLA, the team doctor came up and he asked me, who's the incompetent orthopedic surgeon at Michigan State Athletics? And I said, me. And I had other people call me and ask me, did you know what they're saying about you? And I said, yes, I've been told I was incompetent. My practice went down. People didn't want to come see me because of the publicity of the people in the osteopathic school who wanted to take over sports medicine, had to discredit a medical doctor in order that they could gain that position, which they've now had for 30 years. And in 2016, you'll know what happened to their leadership in the area of sports medicine at Michigan State University. So I was still upset about not being the team orthopedic consultant, and I didn't like the rejection, but then I got some correction. And so my mentor told me, you were in idolatry for Michigan State. I had to take that away. And so if you look at this slide, you'll see the idol that's present on Michigan State's campus. You don't have to look very far to even see a tangible idol, Sparty, on Michigan State's campus. I'm still complaining. I didn't like what was going on. The mentor spoke to me again and said, you be silent, I'll defend you. So one time I'm giving a lecture. I remember it was at Cleveland Clinic, and the people who had supplanted me at Michigan State were in the audience, and bugged me. And so my mentor spoke again and said, would you rather be up here on the stage or down on the field? No contest. I'll take what you've given me to be up on the stage. And although I never treated a Michigan State athlete ever again, my practice then had Hall of Fame athletes. Walter Payton, Singletary, Hampton, you can see Parker, Stargell, and Larry Bird. And so it was interesting that I was still fulfilled in a different way, that although they determined I wasn't competent, the future Hall of Fame athletes all determined that as well. So eventually, I learned what God's will was for my life. I remember that medical school event, and I learned eventually that I had been called for discovery in medicine. But there was still a fundamental error I had in how I functioned. I thought that I was to ask my mentor to bless my ideas, and he finally explained to me, if you do my will, you'll be blessed. I'm no longer blessing your ideas. I'm going to see that my ideas are done through you, and you will be blessed. I had the relationship backwards. Now, looking back on my practice innovations, first arthroscopy 1972, motorized instruments in 78, surgical thigh holder in 80, electronic medical records 1980. I published on bundled payments with a warranty in 1996, which is now being done by the federal government, but without the doctors being in charge. Had the clinical impression on database, which I did, kneeproblem.com, and resulted in over 50 U.S. patents related to medicine and surgery. How has this all happened? I wondered about this myself many times. I know how smart I am, and anybody who has worked with me knows that I'm not very smart. In fact, Steve Arnowski, who I've worked with off and on I thought if he was here, he would have stood up in the audience and said, "Amen, brother," because he knows I'm not smart. So finally the mentor answers me and said, "Here it is. I have taken the abased or the foolish things of this world to confound the wise, and Lanny, you qualified." So here's a simple explanation. There are two different categories. For instance, in music, like with the Beach Boys or Michael Phelps, the famous athlete, these aren't necessarily based on intelligence. They're based on giftedness. So it isn't and or intelligence or giftedness. In my case, it was really based on I was gifted for discovery. I wasn't given a superior intelligence for discovery. I was just given the gifted for that. So at that time, I had a career focus that I modified. I forgo legacy. For instance, on a trip in Europe, on this picture on the left here, you'll see a guy got so famous that they built a statue on him, but still birds crapped on his head. So I'm saying, okay, I'm not after legacy. I'm going to forego that. I'm going to focus on productivity for the rest of my days. But I never stopped being a doctor. There was going to be no retirement after the conclusion of my clinical practice of 35 years. So what were the next chapters? Well, the next chapters was that I was a party to hoarding, and in fact, I even finished the inside of a barn so we could store more things in there. And I then came across the publication from my mentor that said, "Oh, you think you're doing that well? You're going to tear down barns and build bigger ones? Well, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you." So I saw that there was a curse with hoarding. I saw there was a curse for hoarding, and it wasn't a good idea. And after that, I agreed, I'm out of hoarding. I've separated myself from that. And my mentor spoke to me and said, "You're going to be more inventive than ever before. You'll be more prosperous than ever before." And I went, wow, I don't need it. I don't expect it. I didn't ask for it, but I'm willing to accept it. So have you ever had a song running through your mind over and over and over and over again, whatever it was? I don't know if it's a Michigan Fight song or whatever it is. And one night, similar to that, I had like a song playing in my head going over and over and over, a quote from a mentor's prior publication. "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered to the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him." Over and over and over and over. From 4 o'clock in the morning when I woke up until maybe 7, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. I don't know if this is evil. I don't know if this is God. I know I want it to stop. Well, I didn't figure it was evil because it's from one of the mentor's scriptures, so I figured it wasn't. Finally, it stopped. What happened? That quieted down. I had continued curiosity, and here's the rest of the story. Several years ago, I saw in a public publication, a newspaper, that a doctor near Michigan State put insulin secretion on a bioactive anthocyanins, and he put them on these dyes that are from fruits. He put them on the islet cells of rats, and they made more insulin. So here is a dye that will touch, when it touches a cell, will make insulin. So then I wondered, well, these dyes that are of anthocyanins or anthocyanidins, which are the dyes that make blueberries and cherries colors, they're powerful antioxidant dyes. And I had in the past had a consultant with a company, Chiron, where they were using recombinant IGF-1 for 13 weeks in humans, and I saw that actually the tissue, even lacerations, sealed, and other lesions healed very well with IGF-1. And so that's well known in the literature. So I reasoned that if these dyes can turn on certain cells, like the islet cells of rats, can they turn on other cells? So I went to Scripps Institute in La Jolla, California, and we put these dyes on human synovial explants from patients undergoing total knee replacement for degenerative arthritis. And we found out that it turned on the gene for IGF-1. And that gene, IGF-1, increased expression in the synovium of the human explant and increased the IGF-1 in the culture fluid. And so I was then granted a patent on this with the composition of anthocyanins or anthocyanidins for the prevention or treatment of articular cartilage-associated conditions. Another evidence-based outcome. So I subsequently discovered the active reagent of these was not the parent anthocyanin or dye, but it was the metabolite protocatechuic acid. And I have now either been granted patents on or have patents in process for the following utilization. I have a pill for degenerative arthritis, turned on the gene for IGF-1 in the synovium of humans, but also in other mammals like a rabbit. It reversed the catabolic cytokines in the fluid to anabolic, and it protected the articular cartilage by increasing the lubricin, aggrecan, and type 2 collagen by histochemical analysis. I discovered a rapid wound healing reagent. I discovered a broad-spectrum antibiotic. I discovered a biofilm-destroying solution for MRSA and Pseudomonas. I have a bioactive coating for an implant that would put in the patient, would immediately block any biofilm from attaching or any colonies to cause an infection. I have a bioactive coating for dressings or even like a Band-Aid. I discovered preoperative skin penetration sterilant for Propionibacterium acnes, and therefore have discovered a treatment for facial acne. So what I've got is some evidence-based outcomes. These discoveries, from my perspective, are scientific rather than non-scientific. Frankly, they are unbelievable, but I have to tell you, they're true. So a prophetic word to go back now. Did it meet the criteria? Received, not generated, spoken in advance, very specific, can't be contrived, shared with others to get the validation, happens exactly as predicted, and produces a tangible result. I have the evidence-based outcome with these patents, but not without mentors, the advice, direction, and correction. And as many of you have profited by Dr. Fisher's mentorship, I profited by my high school coach, Fred Reynolds, Ralton McCarroll, Lauren Ackerman, and Joe Boys. But they've all passed away. But not my life mentor. Jesus is my tangible evidence outcome producer, as shown here in Rembrandt's 100 Gilder etching of Jesus being a mentor to many people. He's now a mentor to me, and now you've heard the rest of the story.